welcome back to my channel. My name is Daniele and I am a 3D artist. Me and my partner decided to open an activity and we called it Radiant Dust Games. We are planning to design and post reviews about board games that we love. And I thought to keep this as a moment to experiment a little bit with 3D and brand design. The same technique can be used for different reasons, and I would like to give you an overview on how to create a stone in a procedural way and then how to enhance the edges of the stone. Let's start immediately. Let's delete everything. And we keep the main cube that we will use to sculpt our stone. Actually, we can call it like rock immediately. We need to subdivide it, and to do that we start with a subdivision surface modifier. The number of subdivisions should be quite high because we need to deform it in a way that we can go up to 6, to be honest. And we can also shade smooth. As you can see, I press Q to open my quick favorites. To add a command to the quick favorites, you simply go to the command that you want to add, in this case shade smooth. You right click and you add or remove from the quick favorites from here. So I change shade quite often, so I added this to the quick favorites. After that we need to deform our mesh. So the subdivision surface modifier needs to be the first, and we add a displace modifier second. Now you see that the mesh is slightly bigger because it doesn't have a map assigned. So we need to create a new map. We can call it, I don't know, distortion. And clicking on this show texture in texture tab, we basically switch to the texture tab where this distortion map has been created. What we want to do now is simply add, we can use a Voronoi texture. And as you can see, seeing that we added a lot of cuts, even if they are not actually real cuts. If we go back to the subdivision subsurf modifier, if we deactivate it, we simply see the cube distorted. But seeing that the subsurf modifier is active and is the first in line, it displays a second and acts on all the new faces created by the subsurface modifier. So we go back to the texture map and we start changing some stuff like the size, and in this way we have a more rocky style. And we can also go into colors and we can increase or reduce the brightness. The more we increase the brightness, the more the white areas becomes white, and so the map doesn't create this kind of depressions on our mesh. This is basically something that you need to experiment a little bit. You need to play a little bit with the contrast and the brightness in order to create something that it's good for you. The saturation doesn't really change too much in this case because basically there is no it's a black and white map. So but I think that if we act in this way, it should be kinda right. And I think that we are okay. We created a kind of an asteroid shape that can be good for our needs. Now the rock is more or less created. We can actually move a little bit up. So we grab it and we move G, Z, and move a little bit up. We can actually create a new mesh that's gonna act as our floor. We scale it up a lot. And in this very case, we can actually leave the rock as it is, like intersecting with the mesh. If you want to create something more precise, you simply add a boolean to cut this part away, or well, you can use different methods. To be honest, you can also should be in edit mode if I'm not wrong. Yes. And you can use a slice that should be in fine, a bisect, sorry, and you can basically bisect your mesh. In this case, you simply cut the mesh in a half, and as you can see, it acts like an additional loop cut. We don't really need it for this experimentation. The only thing that we need actually is applying the subdivision surface modifier. You can still experiment a little bit and see what happens if you reduce the amount of cuts. I think that with 5 it should be actually fine. So I apply, and the other thing is, yes, now our model is quite dense in terms of cuts and everything. As you notice, if I enter in edit mode, I lose the displace modifier unless basically I show it also in edit mode. But for what we need to do, we need to apply the displace modifier as well. So once you are happy with your shape, you can apply it. We can also scale a little bit up to create a sort of monolith. So we start from the 3D cursor, and I think that we can go into edit mode, and starting from the 3D cursor we can scale on the Z axis, and this will create a more long shape that is actually a good monolith for us. To be honest, I can actually show you how to apply the Boolean modifier. You simply hide the plane that can be called floor for now. You create a mesh, a cube, and you can move the cube down a little bit. So GZ -1. In this case, basically the top of the cube will be on the floor, and you apply Boolean modifier, and the Boolean object should be the cube, and you need to use difference. Now, if you hide the cube, basically the base of our stone is actually basically cut. Of course, we have this kind of artifacts around. It doesn't really change too much because once we apply the texture, there will not be a real problem. So we can also apply the Boolean modifier, and we can delete the cube. It doesn't really matter because it stands on the floor, but for example, when I created our logo, I needed this to be cut because there is a shadow catcher on the ground, on the floor. So the next step is entering the shader editor and the UV editor, because we need to unwrap it. The reason why we are unwrapping this element is because we want the edges to be slightly brighter, whiter than the rest of the rock. So we will need to bake the pointiness value on a map, and in order to do that we need to enter in cycles and have a UV map for this element. So we enter in edit mode, and as you can see we have a UV map at the moment, but the bottom part is not unwrapped as it should be. We simply press U and we unwrap it. Actually, we need to select everything. U Smart UV Project, and yes. So if we use Smart UV Project, the whole element is going to be cut, and it's going to be projected to create the least amount of stretches as possible. If you slide right the top part and you show display stretch, you can see if your mesh is actually stretched. In this case, everything is kind of blue. You don't see red areas. So more or less all the parts of this UV are quite fine. We don't really then to be really precise, because we are going to apply a map, and we are going to paint another map on the top of it. So first thing first, we apply the rocky map on our object. So we go into edit mode and into viewport shading. So I have my textures already prepared, and I start dragging the diffuse basically on the scene. I have the node wrangler activated. If you don't have, go into edit, preferences, add-ons, and you type node wrangler, and as you can see it's activated, but you can activate it easily because it's pre-installed, it's just not active. And with the node wrangler, when you press on node and you press Ctrl T, it automatically creates this texture coordinate and mapping node attached to the vector. So in this way we are using the UV map to project the map. So I will use the UV map for this. Yes. Then we go back to the maps, and we try to see what happens if we apply a roughness map. This is a black and white map. If you press Option, right click, you have this like red line that generates the node, the connection from one point to another. So we connect this to the roughness, but even if this map is black and white, because if I try, and now I'm pressing Shift Control and left click, and it generates this like viewer node. Let me just make this a little bit bigger. This viewer node that basically shows the map projected on the object, just the map, ignoring the rest. So it deters the node to this viewer to show you how it appears. It's a black and white map, but Blender doesn't really recognize it as black and white unless we put non-color data for the color space. So now when we connect the principal BSDF, as you can see, the light, even if there is not really light at the moment, is reflected in a different way. It's a little bit less plasticky. And seeing that we are here, I would start setting up also our world. Usually the fastest way to do it is going into the world tab, the world properties, and under color you select environment texture, then you switch to world, and what you did in here is actually setting up this node structure. If you use the commands for the node wrangler, that's again Ctrl T, you generate the same thing. In this very case, the texture coordinates are from generated because there is no UV map or any other ways you cannot unwrap the environment. So you simply have to look for your texture. I have a bunch of HDRI maps. In our case, I think that, well, if we are in the desert, it should be fine. So we can open this. Of course, you're not gonna be able to see it unless you go into a render view and you see the background. There is another tutorial where I explain how to just to put a single color. Actually, I can show you right now. Basically, you simply Shift D this node, and this is gonna be the background color. You can set as you want. In this case, we can put like a kind of bluish color, and we mix the background generated from the map and the background color. So we add shader mix shader. We put the first one on top and the second on the bottom, and the factor tells what node is going to be visible. Of course, we want to retain the light information from the HDRI map, but we don't want the map to be visible. So if we go into input, light path, we have our light path node, and if we attach its camera ray to the factor, what we are telling to Blender is that if the ray that reaches the camera is direct from the background, you see the second color. Otherwise, you see the effect of the first color. So all the reflections and shadows comes from here, but the background color, what you see is actually this color. Would make it a little bit darker in this case, not too much, but you can actually create different effects if you want. So you can create a shade and other interesting things, but for the time being, I think that we are okay like this. Another thing, you don't really see shadows at the moment because you need to activate them here. So we activate ambient occlusion in the render properties. So ambient occlusion, and as you can see, we start having a kind of an ambient occlusion here. Bloom. Bloom is interesting. Basically, it generates a halo around the objects that are really bright. Screen space reflections, and I deactivate half rest trace, and I activate refraction, even if, well, a stone doesn't really have a lot of refraction. And finally, I would activate high bit depth shadows. So the map that we use generates some kind of shadows. Of course, the light comes from all around because it's like a bright sky. So we see this like darker area, and this is where the sun hits. Since that we see the seam here, we have a way to hide it, to be honest. If we go into object And for now we detach these, and let me just increase the roughness because I cannot bear it. And we project these as a box. Actually, as a box is really bad, so let's keep it flat. Okay, the next map we need to use is the normal map. So rock wall, normal map, you recognize it because it's this purplish map. We press option, right click, and we connect these, and then we add a vector because we virtually move the map, and we add a normal map. We connect the color to the color and the normal map to the normal of the principal BSDF. Now the normal map usually is really strong, so we set it to 0.4, should be fine, yes, and we have this nice effect that looks like the rock is slightly risen. But we need to make these whiter edges. As I said, we cannot create them directly in EEVEE because the EEVEE doesn't use the pointiness. So I start setting up the node, I hide the floor, and I set up the pointiness node. So Shift A, input, geometry, and we have the pointiness here. Now, if I try to connect the pointiness to, let's say, shader, a diffuse shader, so we use the pointiness as the pointiness value as a color, and we connect this to the principal BSDF, nothing really happens, it just looks white. For this reason, we need to go into cycles. We're not gonna use cycles to render these, but we are gonna use it to bake the pointiness. So we have the pointiness map, and we add a converter color ramp in between. Now, if we basically bring the black and the white values closer, you will notice that all the edges, the sharper parts of this shape will become whiter, and the flat parts will become darker. Now it's up to you to play a little bit with these. Kind of like it as it is, and I think that we are ready to go. So we already have our UV map, but we need to bake these. So first thing first, we generate a new map, a new image on which we will project these this result. So these can be called I don't know, edges. And I mean, the map, we can make it ×2 bigger. So as you know, in Blender you can do calculations directly into the fields. We can remove the alpha. The color can be anything because it's gonna be overridden by the color that we are gonna bake, and we are ready to go. So if we enter into edit mode, we have our elements they kind of touch the edges. That's something that I would like to avoid. So in order to correct these, we can go into UV and we can create islands. So we can kind of pack the islands, and we can add a little bit of margin. As you can see, the UV is slightly moved, slightly distorted. It doesn't really change too much for now because we're actually projecting the map using the UV. This means that all the elements are placed exactly on the square that we used as a UV map. So we can use this setup because we have this kind of small gaps in between each island, and for now they're gonna be work fine. We go into texture and we add an image texture. So if we go in here, we have these edges because it's taken from the UV editor, and this is where we are gonna project them up. Now notice that when you do that, you need to select this element. It doesn't really need to be connected to anywhere, but it needs to be selected. So we have our pointiness connected to the material output. We can literally deactivate it so we can see it. And we are ready to go. When you enter in the cycles render engine, you will notice that there is this like bake section. So we are going to bake. We don't have a multi-res element, so we don't really need to select multi-res, but we need to select the diffuse, because what we are going to bake is actually the diffuse channel. We don't need the direct and indirect information, it's just the color that's black and white. We don't have selected to active because we are not baking from a high res element to a low res element. We have a margin of 16 pixels, that's kinda good. I would actually reduce it to, I would say, 6 pixels. And a clear image, we don't really need to clear the image because we're not baking twice or 3 times. So we press bake and we wait. And we finished our baking. I think that it's kind of decent. I mean, the bottom part is quite, it's like as if it was cut. It doesn't really affect us too much. The important thing is are those elements, the edges. So for now we can close the UV editor and we can go back to the main one. We can actually close cycles at this point and we can go back to EEVEE. So as you can see, I am into the viewport shading, so Blender is gonna render a little bit faster for us. And we have this map that's actually on the UV, so we can connect the UV on the edges map. And if we attach the edges to the diffuse, and of course we go back to this, you will see that it has been baked quite well. We're not gonna use this as a color, but we are going to use it as a mask. So what we want to do is having the edges a little bit brighter than the rest. So we connect the diffuse to the diffuse socket. Then we create a mix RGB, so color mix RGB, and we connect the diffuse, and the other socket should be the same diffuse but slightly brighter. So we are going to use color curves, RGB curves. We connect, and I go closer, we connect the color socket to the color socket of our curves, and the curves to the socket, the color socket number 2. Nothing really changes because they are exactly the same colors at the moment. The other thing is we are going to connect, and basically the edges node retains the map that we just made. So if we connect this to the factor, it's gonna be the map that shows the differences on the edges. So if I start increasing, for example, the curves, as you can see, the edges are more, I mean, we can see the cuts that we created before. You can actually change completely the color, you can create weird curves. And we created these creases on the rock. So the procedure can look a little bit complex, but I mean, it takes more time to explain it than to do it. What you have to do now is adding a texture for your floor, and make it work for your video, animation, images, whatever you need. Remember to subscribe to the channel. If you like the video, leave a comment. I will paste the link to the Instagram channel on the description of the video. For this week, it's everything, and I am waiting for you next week for another tutorial. Ciao!